South Korea's homegrown space rocket Nuri is all ready for its fourth launch in the coming hours. The Launch Management Committee is reviewing all possibilities to determine the exact launch time. President Lee Jae-myung has returned home from his 10-day four-nation trip to the Middle East and Africa. We recap the South Korean president's multilateral and pragmatic diplomacy to the global south. The number of newborns between January and September surpassed 190,000 this year. It's the largest year-on-year increase in 18 years. We begin with South Korea's latest space project. In about 5 hours from now, the country's domestic Nuri rocket is heading back into the space for the fourth time for its newest mission. We head over to the launch site straight away where our Park Konu is standing by. Hello there, Konu.
Hi, Dami.
So, Konu, you've been down in Gyeonggi County since yesterday. How are the conditions on the ground at this hour?
Well, conditions are totally fine, I can say, except that it's getting colder and colder, but much, much warmer than yesterday. So still compared to yesterday when we had strong winds and passing rain, it's definitely much more suitable conditions for the launch. And if you take a look at the map, Gyeonggi County and especially the Naro Space Center, where I'm currently at, is located at the very southern part of mainland South Korea, surrounded by ocean on multiple sides. That geography means the area often experiences strong winds. So, if the average wind speed reaches 15 meters per second, or if wind gusts exceed 21 meters per second, all operations will immediately be halted, as gusts could affect how the rocket is positioned, which would disrupt its planned flight trajectory. So we have to hope it doesn't go beyond the limit, as the second Nuri mission had a one-day postponement due to strong winds. And there are also temperature limits the vehicle must withstand, which are between -10 and 35 degrees Celsius. Fortunately, that's not a concern for this time of year in Gyeonggi. And as for the forecast, some rain accompanied by gusty winds is expected later on tonight, but again, fortunately, this is likely to occur after the scheduled launch window at around 1 a.m., so it's unlikely to affect the mission.
That is good to know, Kanu. Now, how are the preparations for the planned launch proceeding at this hour?
Right, so at the moment, most procedures remain on track. As usual, the installation of the Nuri rocket on the launch pad was done at around 11 a.m. this morning. That's the same for connecting the rocket to the umbilical system, which supplies fuel and oxidizer, along with additional checkups to ensure there are no blockages or leaks in the system. Also today, there will be a comprehensive inspection focusing mainly on the fueling system and electrical components. The actual loading of fuel and oxidizer, in fact, will begin 4 hours prior to liftoff. As of now, the estimated launch window is between 12:54 and 1:14 a.m. on Thursday, and the exact launch time will be finalized at 8:15 p.m. That's in just a few minutes, of course, as the Launch Management Committee finishes reviewing the weather conditions, the possibility of collision with space objects, and the overall readiness of the rocket, which started at 7:30 p.m. There are also backup dates running through December 4th in case of any bad weather conditions. Alongside, safety measures are also taking place with police and military personnel on duty near the Space Center, and 27 large security ships have also been dispatched regarding the fact that this is the first nighttime launch. And security will be especially strengthened starting 2 hours prior to liftoff through 10 minutes after.
Konu, hopefully the weather will be okay in time for the launch tonight. And now, in the meantime, what are some of the more notable aspects of this particular mission?
So first of all, this will be, as I mentioned, the first nighttime launch, providing ideal conditions for the main satellite to observe natural light displays, or what we call auroras. That's in fact why the launch is held during that time, as it is the most suitable for the main satellite to reach the orbit for perfect aurora observation. And the mission's main satellite, along with 12 additional satellites up from the 7 carried in the previous launch 2.5 years ago, is set to be deployed into orbit. And one more thing is that the total of 13 satellites is the most satellites ever. And the goal is to reach an altitude of 600 kilometers with an air range of about 6%, while the primary measure of success will be whether the main satellite reaches its designated orbit. And the estimated flight time is a little over 21 minutes, and the Korea Aerospace Administration will announce the results about an hour and 20 minutes after liftoff. And as manufacturing of this fourth vehicle was led entirely by the private company Hanwha Aerospace, this can mark a major milestone in the transfer of technology and a broader shift toward a private sector-driven launch system. And one last tip for our viewers here in the country. If you're hoping to catch a glimpse of the liftoff, some of the best viewing spots include the Space Observatory in Kohung. It offers free admission tonight, but just limited to 200 guests. And another popular area is Yeosu, the city next to Kohung, where Korea's fastest trains run through. With nearby islands including Sado and Nangdo, Yeosu also offers some prime spots for watching the rocket soar into the night sky. So I hope you guys keep an eye on that, and that's all I have for you now. Back to you, Dami.
Kanu, thanks for sharing those spots, viewing spots for tonight. And also thank you for the latest on Thursday's launch of South Korea's Nuri space rocket. Do keep us posted. Now, in other news, South Korea is accelerating the push into next-generation energy technologies, setting a goal to commercialize advanced solar modules by 2028, a move that will be the first in the world. At an economy ministers' meeting on Thursday, Finance Minister Gu Yun-chul unveiled the latest phase of the government's 15 ultra-innovation projects, outlining plans to fast-track key climate and energy technologies. Alongside next-gen solar modules, the government will advance in new power grid systems and support the development of small modular reactors with the aim of entering the global market. President Lee Jae-myung landed at Seoul Air Base earlier this morning from Turkey, ending a 10-day foreign-nation tour of the Middle East and Africa. Our top office correspondent Song Yu-jin walks us through the highlights of his latest diplomatic agenda.
A four-nation trip spanning 10 days. President Lee Jae-myung's first stop on his longest overseas trip yet was a state visit to the United Arab Emirates, South Korea's only special strategic partner in the Middle East.
아랍에미리트 연합이 아마 가장 큰 구체적 성과가 있는 것 같습니다. 거기는 사전에 비서실장이 특사로 가서 협업할 수 있는 분야들도 많이 정리했고 또 구체적 사업도 다 발굴을 했기 때문에.
Following his summit with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the two countries issued a joint declaration to strengthen their partnership and signed 7 MOUs. What stands out the most is the promise of cooperation in AI and defense. South Korea will join the UAE's multi-billion-dollar Stargate project and co-establish hyperscale AI data centers. In defense, the two sides agreed to jointly develop, produce, and even export weapon systems, which the presidential office says could lead to more than $15 billion in orders for Korean firms. From the UAE, President Lee traveled to Egypt, a country with 30 years of diplomatic ties with Korea. Lee said expectations for the summit had initially been modest, but his talks with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, which ran nearly twice the scheduled time, unveiled new opportunities.
카이로 공항을 확장할 계획인데 거기가 아마 4조 원 정도 들지 않겠냐 이렇게 얘기를 하고 그걸 한국 기업들이 좀 맡아서 확장하고 운영도 해주면 좋겠다.
The two leaders agreed to broaden cooperation in international peace, the economy, and defense. MOUs on education and cultural exchange were signed. During his lecture at Cairo University, President Lee unveiled his vision for the broader Middle East, the SHINE Initiative.
S는 stability, 안정을, H는 harmony, 조화를, I는 innovation, 혁신을, N은 network를, E는 education, 교육을 뜻합니다.
The trip's main event followed, the G20 summit in South Africa. Making his G20 debut, President Lee emphasized the need to make artificial intelligence globally accessible and the importance of restoring the multilateral trading system. Good news for South Korea was also made official.
G20 정상회의 출범 20년인 2028년 다시 의장직을 맡아 여정을 함께 이어가려 합니다.
On the sidelines, President Lee held his first bilateral talks with the leaders of France and Germany. Lee's final stop was Turkey, often called South Korea's brother nation bound by blood for its military contributions to the Korean War. Attention was on whether progress could be made on Korea's bid to join Turkey's Sinop nuclear power plant project. Presidents Lee and Recep Tayyip Erdogan agreed to deepen cooperation in defense, nuclear energy, and biohealth.
한국의 우수한 원전 기술과 안전 운영 역량이 튀르키예의 원전 개발에 실질적으로 기여할 수 있기를 바랍니다.
A joint statement was issued covering these areas, along with 3 MOUs on veterans affairs, nuclear energy, and road infrastructure. President Lee says his four-nation tour this time was about strengthening existing partnerships, uncovering new areas of cooperation, and laying a firmer diplomatic foundation. It remains to be seen how the agreements made during this trip will further expand South Korea's diplomacy, especially across the global south. 송유진, Arirang News.
The South Korean economy is continuing its slow in the first half, strong in the second half pattern for this year. Now posting the third highest GDP growth for the third quarter among major OECD countries. Yoon-jin has the details.
South Korea's GDP growth in the third quarter ranked among the highest of the world's major economies. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that preliminary data released by the OECD on Tuesday showed South Korea's third quarter growth at 1.16%, ranking third among 26 economies. Backing the signs of recovery were strong semiconductor exports and domestic demand. Topping the list was Israel with 2.967% growth, and just ahead of South Korea was Indonesia, ranking second at 1.216%. China posted 1.1% growth in the third quarter, which marks the first time in roughly 3 years that its growth rate fell behind South Korea on a quarterly basis. Japan's Nomura Securities drew attention, recently raising its growth outlook for South Korea to 2.3% for next year, higher than its earlier estimate, which was at 1.9%. The new outlook of 2.3% is higher than the 1.8% proposed by the government, the Korea Development Institute, and the International Monetary Fund. Nomura economist for South Korea, Park Jong-woo, said that as stock prices and housing prices rise simultaneously, the wealth effect will help revive consumption, adding that next year's growth rate will exceed the potential growth rate. Meanwhile, a BOK survey showed on Wednesday that business sentiment in South Korea rose to the highest level in more than a year in November, supported by an ongoing boom in the semiconductor industry and improving consumer sentiment. South Korea's consumer sentiment also rose to an 8-year high in November on the back of the country's tariff agreement with the United States and stronger than expected quarterly economic growth. The Composite Business Sentiment Index for all industries rose 1.5 points from October, while the Composite Consumer Sentiment Index climbed 2.6 points from October. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Deputy Prime Minister Gu Yun-chul clarified on Wednesday that the government's new framework for the National Pension Service's foreign investments is not a short-term measure to stabilize the exchange rate. Speaking at the Sejong government complex, Gu addressed market concerns that the pension fund's profitability could be sacrificed to tackle immediate $1 volatility. Instead, he stressed the need for a structural roadmap to manage the fund's liquidity, noting that it's become the market's single largest player, with overseas assets now exceeding the nation's foreign reserves. Following his remarks and continued government monitoring, the won has shown signs of stabilization, trading at around 1,461 against the US dollar. South Korea may be clearing its name as a country with the world's lowest birth rate. The number of newborns in the month of September came to the biggest year-on-year jump in 18 years. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
The number of babies born between January and September surpassed 190,000 this year, marking the largest year-on-year increase in 18 years. That's according to a report released on Wednesday by the Ministry of Data and Statistics. A total of 22,369 babies were born in September, an increase of more than 8% or 1,780 compared to the same month last year. Births have been rising for 15 consecutive months since July last year, and September's figure is the highest for any September since 2020, when 23,499 babies were born. A total of 191,040 babies were born from January to September this year, up 12,488 from the same period last year, marking the largest year-on-year increase in 18 years since 2007. Based on the continued rise in births and marriages since the second half of last year, the number of total births this year is expected to exceed last year's total of 238,317. The uptick in births was driven largely by women in their 30s. The ministry said age-specific fertility rates increased across all age groups except those in their late 20s, with the rate rising by 2.4 among women in their early 30s and by more than 5 among those in their late 30s. The total fertility rate, the expected average number of children a woman will have in her lifetime, was 0.85 in September, up 0.06 from the same month last year. The increase in births can also be attributed to a rise in marriages. The number of marriages in September jumped more than 20% on year to 18,462 and has been rising for 18 consecutive months since April last year. Both the increase in numbers and the growth rate were the highest ever recorded for any September. But although marriages and births are increasing, one expert says there is still room for the improvement.
But even if the fertility rate goes up, it'll still be relatively low. It'll only be around 0.8. And if you want to maintain a stable population, the fertility rate has to be around 2.1. So even though the improvement in the fertility rate is good news, it's still less than half of what we really need.
Though more people in their early 30s are getting married and having children, experts say more needs to be done to keep this trend going. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Seoul City hosted regional leaders today to discuss how AI and digital innovation are reshaping public services and what it will take to prepare workers for the changes ahead. Our Moon Hae-ryun has this report.
Artificial intelligence is transforming how public services are designed and delivered worldwide, creating new challenges that demand new solutions. South Korea's Ministry of Personnel Management and the OECD co-hosted this year's Asia Public Service Network meeting in Seoul on Wednesday, bringing together representatives from 13 countries to strengthen regional cooperation in the public sector. Under the theme Transforming the Public Workforce in the Age of Disruption and Innovation, the event featured sessions on future public service leadership, workforce management in the digital era, and the role of AI in government. Discussions focused on how people and AI can collaborate to create new ways of working and foster more innovative organizational cultures. Minister Choi Dong-seok stressed that the rise of AI requires a fundamental shift in mindset.
What we must do is ask the questions. We must be the ones who identify the problems. Then we simply ask AI how they might be solved, and we evaluate whether the solution is good, ethical, and beneficial for the people. We need to cultivate the ability to think about what truly matters.
He added that the next step in transforming South Korea's public sector lies in helping public officials become autonomous decision makers who can exercise judgment rather than simply rely on rigid hierarchies.
Recently, the Ministry of Personnel Management announced the removal of the duty of obedience from Article 57 of the National Public Officials Act. Instead, they are trying to fundamentally change how we work, to encourage dialogue and discussion so we can find better solutions together.
By strengthening learning and mutual support across the region, the network aims to build public services that can withstand disruption in the digital era and drive innovation and transformation for the benefit of citizens. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
In other news, U.S. President Donald Trump says that Ukraine and Russia are getting very close to a peace deal, with huge progress made over the last week. Cha Yoon-kyung reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump said during the annual Turkey pardoning ceremony on Tuesday local time that his administration is close to a Ukraine-Russia peace deal.
I've also ended 8 wars in 9 months, and we're working on that final war. It's not easy, but I don't know. I think we're going to get there.
In a Truth Social post later on Tuesday afternoon, Trump said there are only a few remaining points of disagreement from his original 28-point peace plan, which has been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides. Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One for the Thanksgiving holiday, Trump backed away from a Thursday deadline for Ukraine to agree to a U.S.-backed peace plan, saying the deadline for him is when it's over. Trump also said his envoy, Steve Witkoff, would be traveling to Moscow soon to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and that his son-in-law Jared Kushner was also involved.
Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. They're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
Trump has suggested he could eventually meet Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, but not until further progress has been made in negotiations. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
As Seoul and Tokyo continue to work towards a future-oriented relationship, tourism has been one of the ways bilateral ties have been developing vigorously. Our Oh Soo-young sat down with a Japanese tourism official for this week's Diplomatic Focus.
Everyday travel is creating a new sense of normalcy in South Korea-Japan relations, with tourism and culture expanding as the two friendly neighbors work towards future-oriented ties. That's according to Yuichi Shimizu, Executive Director of Japan National Tourism Organization in Seoul.
I think the key point is that each country now exists as a familiar, everyday presence in the other. Every visitor forges their own memories, encounters, discoveries, and moments of surprise the closer they look. For every trip, there is that much emotion.
This year marks the 60th anniversary of Korea and Japan's normalization of diplomatic ties. The decades since have seen fluctuations in bilateral relations. During a period of heightened diplomatic tension in 2019, Korean travel to Japan fell by almost 26% to 5.6 million. But that trajectory is changing. Shuttle diplomacy resumes between government leaders and active travel between citizens. In just the first half of 2025, 4.8 million Koreans visited Japan, nearly half of Seoul's population.
For Korean visitors, travel to Japan has become something very familiar. It doesn't require particular effort. It's significant that people now consider Busan or Fukuoka for their trip the following week.
The demographic makeup of visitors has also broadened.
It's slightly early to call it a trend, but solo travelers, visitors in their 20s and 30s are the core. But we also see families and those whose children finish schooling. It is encouraging to see such a wide range of age groups.
The volume of traffic from Japan to Korea has been comparatively smaller, which the executive director attributes to Japan's lower passport ownership rate. 1.2 million Japanese tourists came to Korea in the first quarter of this year, 98.5% of pre-pandemic levels. The increase was driven by individuals and group travellers, indicating sustained popularity of Korean pop culture. Shimizu suggested this also offers an opportunity for cultural collaboration to encourage two-way travel.
This is just my idea, but if Japan and Korea could create joint dramas or films, content that strengthens enthusiasm on both sides, I think that would be marvelous.
Japan has boosted practical support for visitors from Korea, including smoother entry procedures.
The recent priority entry lane for travelers between Japan and Korea was very well received. When it comes to expanding regional routes, travel agencies and local communities are putting in considerable effort. We help promote the appeal of these regions and drive demand.
Among them are smaller cities with unique regional charm, as Koreans increasingly seek immersive experiences.
There are many wonderful places Koreans have not yet visited. I'd like to introduce places without direct flight connections. Nagano Prefecture offers rich culture and nature. Matsumoto, in particular, has beautiful streets, bars, cafes, and the national treasure, Matsumoto Castle.
He emphasized the role of direct encounters in shaping perceptions going ahead. A survey this year found that over 1 in 2 Koreans believe bilateral ties grew stronger through culture and sports over the past 60 years, compared to 1 in 3 who cited improvements in diplomacy and security.
It is not Japan seen through the news, but what you see with your own eyes, experience for yourself, and where you interact with people, those personal memories that accumulate. I believe these are what truly improve our relations.
Making special moments ordinary, Shimi says he hopes endless discoveries and personal encounters will continue to build familiarity and friendship between the two sides. 오수영, Arirang News.
With cold conditions, rain and snow are expected across the country tomorrow. Rain will begin in most parts of the country in the morning, but will have stopped in most places by nighttime. Some of the rain will turn into snow in mountainous areas with low temperatures. There will be 3 to 8 centimeters of snow in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province and 1 to 5 centimeters in other mountainous areas. It will continue to be cold at 5 degrees in Seoul tomorrow and at 3 degrees in Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju. Daily highs will only top out at 9 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 12 degrees in Daejeon and Gwangju, which is similar to the average temperatures for this time of year. Meanwhile, in Goheung in Jeollanam-do province, no major weather disruption is expected for the scheduled launch of the Nuri rocket between 12:54 and 1:14 in the morning. The morning temperature in Seoul will plunge below 0 on Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have at this hour. Well, we'll be back with our special coverage of South Korea's Nuri rocket launch later at 12:35 a.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.